What we're going to talk about today is another case with mysterious money. The subject of our conversation will be Maribel. She killed several people, and she was only 11 years old. She was born in Newcastle, England, on May 26, 1957. Her name is Mary Flora Bell. English is where she was born. Elizabeth Bell, Mary's mother, was only 17 years old when she gave birth to her. Back then, Betty Bell worked as a sex worker. When Mary was born, the first thing she said was, "Take it away from me if you can." Finding out who the bride's real father is what matters. But her mother, Betty, married a man named Billy Bell a little less than a year after she was born. He was like a father figure to her. In fact, he was a professional criminal who stole things from people and robbed them with guns. We can be sure that he did not have the best of childhoods. Nature versus nurture is a very interesting topic in this case because you have to wonder how much her upbringing was to blame for the things she did. To put it another way, this is a very interesting case. And if she had a different upbringing because she had a hard childhood, she would have committed them instead if she had committed other crimes. Because of this, Mary, Billy, and Betty lived in a house that was always dirty. 70 White House Road in Scotswood was the address of the house at that time. There were a lot of violent crimes and other illegal activities in that poor neighborhood in the 1960s. What is it like now? I don't know, but it was a really poor neighborhood back then. More than that, there were a lot of unemployed people living on White House Road. There were always police officers there because there was a lot of sex work, drug use, and domestic violence. Even though there are many clear risks for young children, Mary and the other kids who were playing on the street were all allowed to go out and play without being watched from the time they were 2 years old. Additionally, they were needed all night long, to the point where they would play until midnight when no one was around to watch out for their safety. As I already said, Betty worked in the sex business. Sadomasochism was her specialty, and she also beat and choked her victims. Also, it is said that when Mary's daughter turned 4, she would give her to her for sexual work. People who would pay Betty to sex with Mary and give her money. It was clear that Betty had bipolar disorder. Besides being an alcoholic, she wasn't a very nice person. Many years ago, Mary wet the bed all the time. She was really scared to go to sleep because she thought she might wet the bed. And this was because if Mary wet her bed, Betty would rub her face in it, and sometimes she would even hang the mattress out for everyone in the neighborhood to see. There have been rumors. Besides that, she tried to kill Mary more than once. According to the information our family gave us, Mary accidentally ate a lot of sleeping pills and then got really sick. In another case, Mary had to go to the hospital and have her stomach pumped. The patient also told the doctor that her mother had given her Smarties. In a separate incident, Mary fell off a 2-story winder, and Betty is said to have tried to choke her out more than once. To get rid of Mary, she kept trying over and over again. So much so that she gave her to someone she didn't know. There was a time when she was going to an adoption clinic. A woman was crying as she walked out of the interview room because, despite her best efforts, she had not been able to adopt a child. As a response, Betty pushed Mary toward her and told her that she was going to be brought here to be adopted. She just left after you had a. Anyhow, you have a. Happy to say that Betty's sister can see. I was actually following them. So she found the woman who had taken Mary, went to tell Betty's mother, and Betty's mother told her to go get Mary back within 2 hours. In fact, I was following them. "I'm going to call the police," she said. Betty then went to get Mary, and that was the end of the matter. This woman had bought clothes for Mary before, and she told Betty she could keep the things she had bought with Mary. I really think that Mary, her grandmother, would have had a better life if she had been able to stay with this woman. Mary was mostly cared for by her uncle for the first 6 years of her life, even though Betty kept giving her to friends, family, and different people she knew. And even though they wanted to adopt her, Betty wouldn't let them. Her excuse for continuing to bring Mary there was that she couldn't handle her. "I like how you take care of her," and even though they begged you to let them keep her, she would still come back and get her. She kept saying things like, "No, I can't deal with her, I don't want her, and I find it impossible to deal with her." That never stopped. But after that, she would always come back and get her again. At times it seemed like she wanted to get rid of her, but at other times she was very attached to her. Mary had a really hard time making friends when she was younger. She wouldn't hang out with other people. Even though she was only 4 years old, she seemed very cold and distant. She did make friends with a 5-year-old girl who lived on the same street as her. Furthermore, this girl said she had seen Mary's mother giving her Smarties while they were in the backyard. And thank goodness, a bus hit and killed this girl right in front of Mary while they were playing on the street. Mary would have been through a lot of trauma during this event, especially since she was also dealing with other problems at home at the time. Everyone at Mary's school knew that she caused trouble and lied all the time. For some reason, she was often violent, and she had a very short fuse. She seemed fine one minute, and then very angry and violent the next. All the other kids were too scared to play with her. The fact that she was teased by other kids and known for hitting, kicking, punching, and just grabbing other kids by the throat made her feel even more alone. Mary had one friend. Her name was Norman Bell. However, even though they weren't related, I think that Bell could have been a popular last name, or it could have just been a coincidence. But they lived right next door to each other, and were so close that they hardly ever went apart. Norma did everything that Mary did. They went to all of the places they visited together. Norman was smarter than Mary, even though Norman was 2 years older than Marion. It was clear that she had more common sense than the other person, so she was in charge. As if Norma would do what she said she would do. In 1968, on May 11th, Mary was 10 years old and Norma was 12. They took John, who was 3 years old at the time, to the store to buy some candy. It seems like Norma was the type of person who was seen as simple. A woman named Marion Norma brought John, who was bleeding from the head, into the de Laval Arms pub, saying that they found him next to some old sheds. This happened less than an hour after the first discovery. For help, the local police and an ambulance were called. The boy who fell off a cliff hurt himself, but Mary and Norma did not have to deal with any consequences. The boy also fully recovered from his injuries. However, Mary later said that she was the one who pulled this boy back from the edge. The next day, on May 12th, Mary attacked 3 girls who were playing in the sandpit at the Woodlands creche and daycare for no reason. Pauline, 7 years old, was having fun in the sandbox with her friends Susan, 6, and Cindy, also 6. Because Mary lost her temper so quickly, she started to choke her and try to push sand down her throat. Mary had grabbed us by the neck, while Norma had us pinned down. This kept us from being strangled, and it was a rough year for me. It went downhill quickly, getting poor and far away. I couldn't keep going fast enough to try to stop her fingers either. Norma jumped up, and by that time she had already jumped up, so I think she was a little scared of what you saw and what Mary was doing. I was able to fight my way free and run home. Susan had the same thing happen to her when she did it. After that, she went up to Cindy and asked, "What happens when you hurt someone? Do they die?" After that, all she did was put her hands around her throat and choke her. Many people say that Cindy became a dad during this time, and they also say that the marks on Pauline's blouse could be seen for 3 days after the attack. This happened even though Pauline's mother called the police and told them where they were. Mary's behavior kept getting worse, but nothing was done to deal with the problem. Martin Brown was only 4 years old when he was found on May 25, 1968. His younger sister Linda, his mother Jane, and his father Georgie all lived in the house at 140 St. Margaret's Road with him. He was obviously a bad kid. He has decided in the past that he wants a swimming pool in the bedroom. In order to do this, he put water in a drawer and a chest of drawers, which caused the drawers to overflow. He always smiled and laughed, though. Everyone who knew him loved him very much, even though he was very naughty. He woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning on Saturday, the 25th. People in the house were still sleeping because it was the weekend, and that's how people usually spend their time. He went about his business as he normally would. I can understand it. He went downstairs without being seen. Some cookies and milk were consumed. Some were brought to his depressed room with Linda, and he fed some to her and to her cot. He also drank some milk. Around 9 in the morning, he woke up his parents for breakfast, and then he was free to do his own thing all day because, as I said, kids over 2 years old could play and hang out in the streets without any adult supervision. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he went to his aunt's house to ask for some money so he could go to Dixon's, the local store. He left Dixon's around 3:15 p.m. after going there to buy a lollipop. There were now a lot of empty old houses and buildings in the neighborhood, and the kids liked to play in them. Also, the person in charge of tearing down buildings and other things was in the process of tearing down a number of homes and buildings all over the region. After that, They just kind of left them all alone wherever they were. At 3:30 in the afternoon, they left a number of buildings that were all bare and empty. Martin was last seen at Dixon's 15 minutes ago. At that time, these three boys were looking for scrap wood in these empty buildings. When they got to number 85, they went up to the second floor and saw Martin lying on his back with his arms outstretched and blood and saliva coming out of his head. Martin was discovered on his back. A small group of people were working near the road where they were. When these workers heard their call, they rushed over, found Martin dead, and called for an ambulance right away. At 3:35 in the afternoon, the ambulance showed up. Martin could not be saved with cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR, because it was already too late. There was no sign that he had been fighting, and there were also no signs that his body had been hurt. Another thing nearby was a bottle of aspirin. Because of this, they thought he might have thought it was candy and tried to eat it. He died because of this. It was possible to find out what caused the death during the post-mortem examination. So, the police thought it was just an accident and that he died naturally. He was found living in an empty house when he was 4 years old. His mouth was bleeding and he was salivating. Everything makes sense. Some ideas were put forward, like the idea that he remembered climbing to the top of the stairs and being scared to go down them because he had fallen down them when he was very little. It was said that we could kind of feel the shock of it. The news made the Scots community very angry. Although the exact cause of death wasn't known, people thought that Martin had died while playing in these unsafe abandoned buildings. Maribel and Normabel were at the front of all of these marches. They marched and protested so that these empty homes and buildings would be torn down. They were laughing and smiling the whole time. Mary was celebrating her 11th birthday with Norma at Norma's house the next day, May 26th. Norma's father happened to walk in on Mary and Norma and killed her. Mary was able to get away from the trouble. My younger sister, make sure you take a shot for every time I use the word Norma in that sentence. No, I say it again, no. He ran in while Mary was trying to choke his daughter and split the two of them up. His daughter turned bright red. He didn't really think about it, though. He thought they were playing some kind of violent game. So he told them to stop what they were doing and stop playing the next day. On May 27th, someone broke into the nursery in Scott Tower. That day was the day of the event. The police were called. The police checked the nursery and found that nothing had been taken or moved around. Someone had just broken into the house to damage it and leave some notes. It seemed like there were only 4 notes left at the scene. Is this one of the notes? Martin Brown was really killed by us. You jerk can go to hell. Sometimes I'm really mad. In addition, this means I might come back. Someone else said, fuck off, we murder. Be careful. It's enjoyable. And the F-word slur. As for the most recent one, it got a little off track. It sounded like, you are my C because we murdered Martin. There are a lot of spelling and grammar mistakes, and the writing itself is terrible. It was clear that it looked like it was written by a child. Martin's death was ruled an accident, so they just say it was a stupid joke that some kids thought was funny. Over the next few weeks, Mary made it a habit to go to Martin's house every week. June, his mother, was the one she would talk to and ask how she was feeling and if she was crying over Martin. She couldn't help but smile and laugh when she thought about Martin. She really missed him. Jean told her, no, sweetheart, you can't see Martin because he has died. As she started to ask about seeing him, Mary replied, I know he's dead. I'd like to see him lying in his coffin. She did nothing but stand there and smile. Jane was shocked when she saw this 11-year-old girl standing there with a smile on her face and wanting to see a dead baby. And finally, when she was done talking, she just shut the door. Brian Howe, who was 3 years old at the time, was last seen playing with his dog on White House Road on July 31st, 9 weeks after he went missing. The kids called for him when it was time for dinner, but he didn't come home. They looked all over the neighborhood but couldn't find any signs of Brian. Not long after that, a lot of people from the neighborhood came out to help them look for Brian. They were helping to look for a 3-year-old child who had gone missing. Mary and Norma Bell, who looked like they were very happy, were among those helping. The search team started singing, dancing, and skipping around as soon as they realized Brian wasn't in sight. The way he ended up calling the police is shown below. It was late at night when the police finally found Brian's body. He was 3 years old and had been missing for a long time. It was lying in a field near his home that was full of green and purple weeds. It was immediately clear to the police that he had been killed when they found his body. Clear signs of this were the scratches and bruises around his neck, which showed that he had been strangled. On top of that, his face was covered in scratches, and blood could be seen coming out of his mouth. Police Detective Chief Constable James Dobson was in charge of the investigation into Brian's death. He had been at the scene where Martin Brown's body was found just a few weeks before. When Detective Dobson saw the similarities between the two crimes, he decided that the cuts on Brian's body did not show anger. The way they were made showed a strange sense of humor. After the autopsy, it was determined that Brian had died by strangulation sometime between 3:30 and 4:30 p.m. The day was the day his body was found. It was found that he had 2 scratches on the left side of his neck and 3 scratches on the right side of his neck during the autopsy. He had a lot of marks on his nose that showed someone had pinched both sides of it very hard. 6 holes had been poked in his thighs and legs, and his genitalia had been cut. Besides that, he had a cut on each foot. Everyone could see that the marks on his legs, his thighs, and his genital holes were just small burns that had only gone through the skin. The letter M was carved into his stomach at first, and it was carved into his stomach. The letter was on his stomach, and his hair was cut short. It looked like an extra line had been added to the end to make it AM, though not long after the murder, which may have been done by a different person. Based on what was found, a very small amount of force would have been enough to kill a 3-year-old in this way. On top of that, adults usually use a lot more force than is necessary, so it's likely that the person who did it was a child. After that, the police started to look into what was going on. In the first 24 hours of their investigation, they went to more than 1,000 homes. They talked to over 1,200 kids and gave all of their parents mimeograph questionnaires to fill out Mary and Norman Bell. Of the kids who were questioned by police and were visited more than once because their answers were vague and conflicting, Dobson said he immediately thought Mary and Norman was sketchy because their answers and stories kept changing and they were just smiling. Everything the whole time, like it was some kind of big joke. Though Mary was talking with Dobson, all of a sudden she remembered something she had forgotten. She told them that she had seen a child named standing on Delaval Road with Brian on the day that Brian was killed. The kid was 8 years old. She said that the two of them had been playing together a lot, and then she saw a hit. It was written by Brian Chineri. Then she said that he hit Brian in the face and neck with his blows. Just to make things worse, she said she had seen someone playing with a silver pair of scissors that looked like they were broken in some way. They looked like one of their legs wasn't working right. In other words, it was broken, snapped, or something similar. Additionally, she said that she had seen someone use these scissors to try to cut off a cat's tail. One of the strange things about this case is that Susan, who fits that description perfectly, was found close to Brian's body. At the same time, this information wasn't out in the open. Up until now, no picture of these scissors has been taken. The police had not told anyone about this information up to this point. The news media did not have any of this information at that time. This meant that most people didn't know that the killer and the police were the only ones who knew about them. And then they found out that this young man, A, was at the airport with his family on the day of Brian's model, so he couldn't be blamed for what happened. At this point, Marion seemed to be acting very suspicious, as if she had talked about the scissors that were found near Brian's body and that only the police and the person who attacked him knew about. Almost certainly. Also, these scissors were thought to be the ones who cut and punctured Brian's body all over. On top of that, the stories she and Norman told were always different. They were laughing the whole time as if it were something funny. Also, except for Mary and Norma, none of the other people had been considered possible suspects by this point, which happened on August 4th. Detective Dobson, when he talked to Norma for the 3rd or 4th time, she told him that she had been playing with her brothers and sisters from 2 to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. On the other hand, all of the kids said in their statements that they saw her playing with Mary Dobson. He told her this and said, "Listen, I know you're telling me this, but other kids said they saw you with Mary." Because of this, Norma changed her story again. In response, she said, "Yeah, I was with Mary. Mary was also the one who took me to see Brian." Dobson took Norma to the police station as soon as he heard this news in order to get an official statement about what happened. Not only that, but Norma also told them that Mary had taken her to the place where Brian's body was found. She said Mary told her that she had killed Brian by squeezing his neck and pulling his lungs up, which is how you kill someone. She said it. Mary told him she was excited about the experience as she ran her fingers along his purple lips. She said that Mary provided her with a raised Brian's shot, and showed her the wounds on Brian's stomach. Following that, she hid the razor by putting it under a block and told Norma not to tell anyone else about it. When Dobson asked Norma to show him where the razor was hidden, she agreed. Because of this, around 8:30 at night, they went down to the place where Brian's body was found, and she pointed to this concrete block. It was amazing to see that the author could still be seen when Dobson looked under the block. Soon after what happened, she was taken back to the police station to give an official statement. Then at 12:15 in the morning, on August 5th, Dobson and 2 other police officers went to Mary Bell's house to question her and then brought her to the station. Mary Bell was brought in to be talked to. During the whole process, she was very protective and angry, and she even threatened to call a lawyer, which I don't understand at all. It's like this little girl, 11 years old, is threatening to call a lawyer now. When the police told her that Norma had shown them the razor, she really did say she would kill Norma too. To the Dobson, they tried to hold her, but they couldn't. They didn't have any proof that could be used to prove she was guilty. For someone who works as a police nurse, it's also possible that Norma is lying about the whole thing and trying to put all the blame on Mary when, in reality, it may have been a normal occurrence. Because of this, they had to let her go. Detective Dobson was at Brian Howe's funeral on August 7th in the morning so that he could kind of watch the crowd and see if anyone seemed suspicious. At this point, he said he knew Mary Bell was guilty of the crime. In addition, here is a quote from what Detective Dobson said. In front of the Howe's house, Mary Bell was present when the coffin was brought out. Not until I saw her there did I understand what was going on. She had caught my eye. It was that day that I didn't have the courage to take a chance. She was laughing and rubbing her hands together as she stood there. It was another one. I told myself, oh my God, I have to bring her there. Because of this, I decided that I would arrest Mary in the afternoon. At first, he arrested Mary and questioned her, during which she tried to blame him for everything. Honor. She came clean and said that she was the one who killed Brian. She gave a negative answer. He really put a lot of pressure on his throat, and she pulled her shoulders back to try to stop him. The good news is that no one went crazy. She first yelled at her, and then she threw Brian, hitting him in the head and killing him. As I said before, Dobson brought up Martin Brown while Mary was questioning him because he thought right away that the 2 cases were linked as soon as he saw Brian's body. Mary quickly admitted it, but she put the blame on Norma, saying that Norma wrote the letters and broke into the nursery. Mary was told that he thought she and Norma had broken into the nursery and written the notes that were there. That night, it was too late for him to do anything because he needed more proof to show a link between the 2 events. But by 8 o'clock, in fact, he did arrest Mary that night for killing Brian Howe. And then, at 8:30 in the evening, he also arrested Norma and charged her with the Brian Howe case. After that, they were told off at the police station in Newcastle West End on August 21st. The cause of Martin Brown's death was finally found after a thorough investigation. They got in touch with the girls' school and asked to borrow some of her books so that they could compare the handwriting on those books to the handwriting that was found on the notes that were stolen from the nursery. Some words would be written by Norma, some words would be written by Mary, and so on. The handwriting looked eerily alike, and it looked like they switched her around. 2 words would be written by Mary, and then 2 words would be written by Norma. As soon as they found this, they were sure that Mary and Norma were the ones who broke into the nursery and destroyed one of Mary's school books. They also said they were sure of this. Another thing they found was a story she had written the day after Martin had died. He said that a lot of people were gathered in front of an old house. I needed to understand what was wrong. A young boy died after being laid down for a short time. Along with that story, she drew a picture of Martin's body lying down dead. It was only 4 years old for Martin. Someone who works there and finds the body. A small pill bottle with the word tablet written on it was also close to the body. One of the strangest things about this case is that the pill bottle that was found next to Martin's body had never been seen by the public before. The media had not been able to get this kind of information. There was never a statement like that from the police. Those pill bottles have not been shown in any pictures. Few people would know anything about that pill bottle besides the police, the 3 boys who found the body, and the person who killed the person. In addition, the watchman at this location called for help. There were a few minutes between when Mom's body was found and when Mary and Norman showed up. That's another strange piece of information. In addition, they found out that Mary had talked to the people who lived in the houses and told them that Norma had strangled Brian to death. To make things even worse, the fact that he had died of suffocation was also kept from them. The killer and the police would be the only ones who know this information. According to the investigation, fibers from one of Mary's clothes were found on both of the victims. Researchers also found fibers in Brian Howe's body that came from one of Norman's clothes. Because of this, both girls were charged with killing Martin Brown by the police. At the Newcastle Assizes on December 5, 1968, the trial for the killings of Brian Howe and Martin Brown began. The Assizes were in the English city of Newcastle. During the trial, most people thought that married people were guilty, but there was doubt about Norman's guilt and Mary's family, and the trial did not help the situation. She was often getting in the way by crying out in a very loud voice. It was her mother, Martha. At one point in the proceedings, she left the courtroom quickly and then came back in a big way a few seconds later. Watching her was a lot like watching a soap opera, and she was basically just acting really badly. On the other hand, Norma was the result of the ideas of 11 children working together. They were much nicer to her when she was growing up. Unlike Mary, who seemed emotionally numb and showed no sign of regret at all, she responded to the evidence and testimony with a more childlike mix of fear and tears of fear. Mary, there was a big difference in personality between the 2 daughters. They are smart and aware, and they can answer the counselor when they question her shake-up and make very funny little asides. I think she was completely overwhelmed by the environment, even though she wasn't as smart as the other girl. Additionally, the court almost split the 2 people, saying that the smarter person must have done it and that the less emotional person probably didn't because she couldn't show her feelings. After the trial was over on December 14th, Norma Bell was found not guilty on the grounds that Mary had lied to her and made her do what she did. In reality, Mary was seen by several psychiatrists, and all of them said she had psychopathic traits. Due to her lack of sophistication and inability to imagine the possible outcomes of what Mary was creating, it was thought that she did not understand the significance of what she was doing. People found Mary guilty of manslaughter because she had some psychopath-like traits, which meant she had less responsibility for the crime. The sentence she received said that she would be held at Her Majesty's pleasure, which means that she will be held for an unknown amount of time. She was called dangerous by the court, which said she was a very serious threat to other children. This is because the case is so ridiculous, and people in the UK weren't used to having to jail 11-year-old girls for murder. They weren't sure what to do with her. Because she was too dangerous to be put in a home for troubled kids, mental hospitals couldn't take her in because they didn't have the right tools. She was then sent to the Red Bank Special Unit, a reform school in St. Helens, Lancashire County, because of this. Unfortunately, it was put into a school car that was only meant for Mary, even though it's really only used by boys. Besides that, her mother Betty visited her often. That Mary seemed very happy every time she got to see her mother, but later she would act meanly, and she seemed to stop doing that. She was also able to benefit from Mary's good name. She told Mary she should write letters and poems that the press could buy, and Mary did. She then sold her story to tabloids. Her piece was also bought by the press. And because of Betty, Mary was paid £50,000 for a story. It was like a girl who killed 2, 3, and 4-year-old boys getting £50,000 for beating them up. It is disgusting. Even so, Mary always said her mother was to blame for how she turned out. Someone wrote to Mary's mother and said that she was to blame for the bad things that happened in her life while she was in Red Bank. Please calm my little worried mind down, ma'am. Tell the judge and the jury while you're on your knees. They will listen to your calls for plays. You are in charge, not me. Sorry about that. This is the only way it can be. We cry together in the end, and then you leave. Make them aware that you are in charge. Please help me. Mom, I'll be free when that happens. I am your daughter right now. Betty, are you telling the truth when you say that your daughter is innocent? By saying that, I'm not saying that she was above blame, but she had to have been driven by something to act this way. In fact, it's possible that I am responsible for what I am doing. How were her family and life different from other people's? Do you think that could have been what drove them to do this, Mavis? I was the one who made her deal with some of the fights between my husband and me. I'm not sure. No. Have there been times when you felt like there was no way out? What about being small? Does your mood make you sad? Not even close. A lot of stress caused by a lot of strain. In 1970, Mary told a counselor that a housemaster had raped and sex with her. But her story was found to be false, and she was kicked out of the counseling program, even though the staff had been changed. She was moved to more court-open prison almost right away, when she was 16 years old. An open jail is also similar to a prison in that the prisoners are left to complete their sentences with little supervision. Most of the time, prisoners are not locked up in their cells, and they can have jobs while they are serving their sentences. It is also possible for them to leave the facility and go to work. Back in 1977, when Mary was 20 years old, she got away from prison to hook up with a guy. She missed a chance, though. She was found, and she was brought back to us. Because she was guilty, she was punished by losing all of her rights for 28 days. After 3 years in prison, Mary was let out without being named in 1980, when she was 23 years old. It was 16 years since Martin's case had been brought before the court, but this gave her the freedom to start a new life on May 25, 1984. Mary had a daughter. Also, her child could stay anonymous until she turned 18. Mary had every intention of never telling her daughter who she was or what she had done in the past. After she turned 14, though, people found out who she was and where she lived. They had to leave the house where she lived because her daughter would no longer be able to hide her identity when she turned 18. I think she also had to leave the house she lived in. After all, Mary went to court to fight for her right to stay anonymous for the rest of her life, and she won. After that, Mary became a grandmother in 2001, when she was 51 years old. She and her granddaughter both stayed anonymous. So, please feel free to tell me what you think about this. In my opinion, it looks like it will be very hard. The reason Mary was let go was because it looks like she is fully grown up. And even though she had a terrible childhood, I don't think she should spend the rest of her life locked up. She was only 11 years old at the time, but she seems to have changed her mind about everything. On the other hand, I think the sentence might have been a little more than 12 years for killing 2 boys between the ages of 3 and 4. In other words, just think about what their parents must have had to go through. They were never given. What we're going to talk about today is another case with mysterious money. The subject of our conversation will be Maribel. She killed several people, and she was only 11 years old. She was born in Newcastle, England, on May 26, 1957. Her name is Mary Flora Bell. English is where she was born. Elizabeth Bell, Mary's mother, was only 17 years old when she gave birth to her. Back then, Betty Bell worked as a sex worker.